And I guess my first question is, how is your heart doing right now? I'm hearing different things from different people. There are definitely some people who are feeling more heart expanded and feeling very present with their feelings and with gratitude and with appreciation for the simple, small things. But then the other end of that scale, and actually often in tandem with that level of heart presence, there can be this element that came through for the energy update for October of sheets of emotion leaving you. Unexpected or unidentifiable emotional reactions to things, or just general feelings of emotions that are moving through you, moving for you, being catalyzed by others, being catalyzed by events in your life. And often it can show up as seemingly extreme reactions to things that otherwise you wouldn't normally feel as strongly about. And it's interesting because grief has come up a little bit in the conversation, in the questions for today's portal broadcast. There was a specific question that was asking about how the Z's have talked about grief being a window to more grief, and how one thing in our life can catalyze us into a grief reaction, but that depending on the timing of that event in our lives and our readiness and how much grief we might be ready to release, a trigger event of, say, losing a beloved pet or friend can actually be the doorway that opens in you that lets you flood through a lot of grief from your life around loss, particularly around the loss of other people or beings. It can often be the case that when we're grieving the loss of a loved one, and the same is true also if you're going through a difficulty with a friend, or you can't be friends with someone anymore, or someone that you used to know. I've heard that a lot in the last couple of years. I've had my own experiences with it too. There's a grief that we have to acknowledge. You know, even in a relationship, separation of any kind, where perhaps a couple have decided they no longer want to be a couple, and they both agree on it, and they're going to find their way to friendship, and they're going to do it amicably. There can still be a sense of loss, even if there is a sense of rightness, or a sense of this is true for the future. But what happens is our body starts to change in response to the physicalized change that we go through. So we notice it in a breakup in a romantic relationship, for example, by, oh, I'm sitting by myself now at night, or they're the person that I would have spoken to, and they're the person I would have told. So our body wants to lean into that connection muscle memory. And it's the same when someone passes over. When we lose somebody, there is this rearrangement that happens in the threads between us and them. One thing that the Z's explained many years ago in a public setting that made a lot of sense to me, and it helped me see it differently. They talked about how every relationship that we have receives a slightly different part of us, and in turn creates a slightly different reaction in us and for us. So for example, I mean, I've met people in my life who don't seem that different. You know, I've seen them with a variety of people, and they seem fairly consistent to the outside eye, perhaps, but even they are going through internal shifts with every chemical reaction. And then I think more people that I see, and I identify with this too, you are the same person, but there are certain relationships in your life that you have that are very particular. This is the person I laugh hilariously with, because we have the same sense of humor, or there's a click. This is the person that I have deep and meaningful conversations with. This is the person that I go and do fun things with. This is the person that always puts me slightly on edge. And of course, I'm being very blunt in those descriptions. There are always more shades of grey. And I do think that we can have elements of all of those with everybody. But when a person who has sponsored a certain side of you disappears, so there was a certain way that you would be with your dad, or with your mom, or with your sister, or with your best friend. And it was a way of being that you could only really hit at those levels with that person. When they're gone, the grief is both the loss of them, but it's also this chemical reaction inside our bodies of, oh, I don't get to be that person anymore. I don't get to experience that beautiful chemistry between the two of us. So from my perspective, as a young person growing up, I never felt that grief was explained in a very satisfactory way, at least not to my experience. But when I started to realize grief is very multidimensional. And of course, you know, the biggest truth for any of us who are alive is that we will constantly be letting go. We will constantly be changing. It's not always comfortable, you know. We also love our safeties and we love our routines. It's part of the nature of keeping the animal alive, a certain level of safety. And I think if there's one thing that we can all agree on in the last 2 to 3 years, there is a waking and a shaking in people's minds and in people's perceptions about what reality is, or what they thought reality was. And I'm not even speaking metaphysically here. I'm just talking about the seismic shift that happened in 2020 in people's experience of their life. And it was like we were all pulled out of a dream that was allowed to continue. And now we have a different sense of reality. So the sheets of emotion that are a bit more close to the surface, to me, I understand them as the top crest of a wave of intense emotion that, you know, we've been moving through for about 2.5 years now. And that might be odd for some of you to say, to grapple with, because I think if you are empathic or you are sensitive, intense emotion is not necessarily new to you. You know, you're like, well, kind of lived in that all my life. But it's different when it hits the collective in a big way. And not necessarily for reasons of consciousness or understanding necessarily, just emotional reaction. And I think that can often be the hardest thing for sensitives or empaths to deal with. High levels of emotion that aren't very conscious of why they're happening, or from a person who has not yet either been able to see the emotion that they're in, or have someone explain to them or help them understand what to do when that hits them, when it happens for them. So it is interesting to me as I kind of get this stream with all of you right now, that there is a kind of top crest of emotion that's hitting many of us right now that is a bit of a hangover, or the next phase of everything that's been going on the last 2.5 years. So this could show up for you in many ways. It could have shown up as fear and anxiety. It could have shown up as health concern or issues or fear around health. It could have shown up in you as purely unexplainable waves of emotion, energy release. So I think one of the things that you'll hear me talk about a lot, and it's something I also practice myself, is reminding myself to give myself as many moments of presence as I can, because it's very easy to get sucked out of presence, or to be, you know, in the world and just going with the flow of everything. It's very interesting. We've got my family visiting right now, and it's been lovely, and also full, you know, when you're hosting people. And we went to Universal Studios, and I remember going to Universal Studios in about 2018, and Stephen and I went with other family members, and we couldn't cope. We got there really early, and we had to leave by about 1 o'clock. We were like, and it was very interesting. 2 things struck me at Universal Studios last week. Number one, we survived. We were there from about 11 till about 6, so that was quite a long time. And I was reminded that sensitivity is an ever-changing thing, and that if we keep finding ways to honor our sensitivity find tools that work for us with our sensitivity, we change, we grow. And so I just throw that out there to any of you who find yourselves too sensitive too much of the time for your own liking. You know, you're like, oh my God, when will I be able to get over this? I've gone through all kinds of periods in my life with sensitivity where I've sometimes felt like a raw nerve. And then, you know, right now at this moment in my life, and of course, who knows what's coming in the next decade or so, I feel much more galvanized, and Universal Studios was the perfect test of that. It was like, oh, I can see what's going on here, and I can tune in on the things I want to tune in on, and I can also tune out, and I can just enjoy witnessing my mom go around Universal Studios and being with my mom and family members. But what was really interesting to me in Universal Studios that I paid close attention to was I didn't see a ton of joy in many people at all. Now, fair enough, if you've got a family and you know, I didn't envy the parents. I was like, man, I would not want to have to be marshalling groups of kids through this environment, because I know that's a full-on thing for parents, but I didn't see a lot of joy. And I was very struck by that, because to me, Universal Studios, of course, has a certain imprint, and it's the kind of thing that 30, 40, 50 years ago was the thing we were all told, oh, this is a great fun day. We had fun, and I was conscious that we were going to have fun. But what I noticed in the general vibe of the crowd was a certain level of overstimulation, a certain level of exhaustion, a certain level of having to navigate it. And it was probably the first time in I don't know how long I've been in that kind of crowd, that big a crowd in a public setting, in a place. And we weren't even there on a busy day. Probably I wouldn't have coped if it was like a school holiday day. So it was just something I thought to myself as a self-reflection, and Stephen and I said the same thing. Oh, we're clearly doing better, because we're able to find our way round this, to navigate this. And to me, that only comes from self-resourcing. It only comes for me from knowing what I need, and most importantly, knowing when I'm hitting my limit. Because you still hit your limit. I still hit my limit. I still have things that are overwhelming or overly stressful or challenging. But the difference is, in the old days, I either wouldn't have seen that early enough, or I wouldn't have known what to do about it, or I would have tried to avoid either upsetting other people or letting other people down or cancelling, oh no, I can't come, I'm sorry. And I went through a period where I really did a lot of that. And these days I find I have to do that less and less than ever before, because I'm clearer about some level of self-containment that I previously don't think I was in such strong possession of. Hi, I'm Lee, and every month I do an energy update. Some of you may have seen them. I take the pulse on themes that might show up for us energetically, emotionally, or psychologically. Well, on December 21st, the day of the solstice, I will be doing a live annual energy update. So I'll be taking a look at the whole of the year of 2023, and not only walking you through the 8 to 10 themes that I get about the year ahead, but also helping you find a way to approach some of those themes. And I close the whole broadcast with a channeled message from my guides, the Z's, about what we can expect in 2023. It will be around 60 to 75 minutes long, and it's completely free, so please join me by signing up at the link below. Hope to see you there.